like to have the pleasure, which never happened before, actually happened I think once, to introduce my brother, Amechaye Even-Israel, Rabbi Amechaye Even-Israel, who is our Director-in-Chief of our Mishnah project in Israel, and he will teach us some other Jewish texts. Enjoy.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me apologize for my lousy English, but I hope that in the time being you will survive it. Thank you, many, for your words of wisdom, and he's my boss, so I can only say positive things about him, now, at least. Many spoke about the first time we see in my father's writings about the neshama. And it is true that not always in his writings can you see a lot about the neshama. But I do think, my father dedicated so many years of his life to spreading the knowledge of Talmud, to open the Talmud for literally everyone. So you can definitely say that Talmud, and again making it accessible, was his life's mission. But life's mission is one thing. But if you ask what is his passion, what is he passionate about, that's definitely the soul. The soul, everything that has to do with Jewish mysticism, with Kabbalah and Chassidut, that's his soul. That's where you see his passion. Many mentioned our life in our house, our family. Many mentioned the 10 Sfirot, the 4 worlds. When I was 4, I think, my mother taught me the 4 worlds and the 10 Sfirot. I mean, that's what I knew. I knew by heart the 10 Sfirot, the 4 worlds. That was something that you spoke about in the house. So yes, we did speak sometimes about food and school and whatever Moshe Rabbeinu's kids spoke about. But we mainly spoke about the soul. I mean, my parents were both each in his way are somehow, being more busy with the spiritual than with what's happening down here. So yes, we spoke about the soul, and soul was a very, very important thing in our lives. Today, I want to learn, I don't like to use the word teach, I want to learn together some pieces of the Tanya. Tanya is one of my favorite books. And I think this is something I definitely got from my parents, because both admire Tanya, and it's part of their life, it's part of their soul. The learning of Tanya, teaching of Tanya. One of my earliest memories of my father is going with him to one of the Israeli local radio stations when he would give his weekly Tanya class or the radio. And for years, he taught Tanya, he spoke about Tanya. And Tanya, when I was on my way here in the plane last night, all of a sudden I thought, Tanya is a book that speaks so much about the neshama. So I decided to try and check the Tanya, or at least the first part of Tanya, the main part of Tanya, contains 53 chapters. It's a long flight, yeah. And I decided to check how many chapters are talking about the neshama. So I I have it on my phone, I glanced through, and out of 53 chapters, only 3 of them, 3, do not mention the neshama. So Tanya is not a book about the neshama. Tanya is a book about Jewish God's worship, about men, about relationship, about so many things, about learning Torah, about observance. But neshama is part of its DNA, it's part of it. Everywhere you open the Tanya, you'll see about the neshama. We're not going to learn 49 or 50 chapters of Tanya today, just some selected quotes from Tanya. And again, I feel very, very close and connected to Tanya. I'm not that old, but I started teaching Tanya at the age of 15 or 16, and it's something that it's an endless love, because whenever I keep opening it, and I keep opening it, you see new things and new teachings and new insights. And I even found out this number of chapters dealing with the neshama just last night after reading this book so many times. When I was invited to this conference day about the neshama, and I saw the schedule, I saw the agenda of the day, and I thought to myself, oh my God, so many hours? Are we going to get a hold of these people for so many hours, such a long day? And I still think that, but the other thing that I did on the plane was reading this book, both Hebrew and English versions, because only after I finished the Hebrew version did I understand that the English version is a bit different, so I had to go through the other one as well. But as many said, it's a tiny book. You can read it whenever. So, since all of you, or most of you, have the Soul book in your hands, I would ask you to open page 119. And I think I found a reason why we're holding you for 7 hours straight about the neshama. The name of the chapter is Listening to the Soul, and I would like to read a little bit of the second paragraph in this page.
Are you selling it? No.
One of the ways we can hear the voice of our soul is by disconnecting from the noises of the environment. At times, this detachment happens spontaneously when we find ourselves alone, for instance, without anything to distract our thoughts. But in case we don't often happen to find ourselves alone with our thoughts, we can create such an environment for ourselves. In certain places, or in accordance with certain traditions, aspiring practitioners are sent off to be alone for a specific period of time, not for the experience, but in order to develop the capability of listening to their inner voice. So I thought, that's the reason. That's the reason. We're here to try and listen to our soul. And in order to listen to our soul, so we have to disconnect. Maybe that's the reason we're here for such a long time, to try and disconnect for a couple hours from our daily life, from the noises of the environment, and just focus on listening to our soul. Because whatever you're going to learn about the soul in this day, and whatever you're going to read about the soul in this great book, you'll probably end up with having more questions than answers. But if you spend a couple hours of your life thinking about the soul and listening, trying to listen to the soul, that will be just worth it. And if you don't mind, if you're already holding this book, I want to read another paragraph that I think will be a great motivation to what we're doing and why are we doing it, and especially to what we're trying to learn from the Tanya today about the soul and its godly nature. So if you'll open page 58, It is the third paragraph, starting with the word, the soul is not. Oh.
What chapter?
Okay, it's the second page of the chapter, What Afflicts the Soul.
It's 64 in the middle. The soul is not.
Okay.
The soul is not
So you see,
material.
even the English version that I got is only one of two. What did I miss in the other version? I'll have something to do on the way back. So, again, this paragraph starts with the word, the soul is not an ethereal abstraction. In general, it acts within reality and within a particular person. It seems logical to assume that the most basic, fundamental pains of the soul are caused by the obstacles in its path to self-realization. Yet its self-realization is simple but profound, the achievement of closeness to God. In this chapter and others, my father is referring to a very famous line of an old Jewish rhymes being, in some Sidurim, it's brought in the beginning of the Sidur, and it's called Simu Lev El HaNeshama. Pay attention to your soul. And I think what he describes here in this paragraph we just read is that we all have a neshama. But sometimes it takes 15, 20, 40, 70, 80 years until we, for the first time, start to think about our neshama, paying attention to our neshama. And this is why our soul is suffering. It's suffering because it doesn't get its attention. It just wants us to know about it, to be aware of its presence, to be aware of what is it and what does it want from us. So what we're going to learn from Tanya, and I'm sorry for such a long introduction, is we're trying to learn a little bit about the way the Admor HaZaken, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of Tanya, is describing the neshama and telling us a little bit about its nature. What I'm going to touch today is mainly about the godly nature of our neshama. So you have this page saying commentary on Tanya, and I'll tell you that it's not really a commentary on Tanya, what you're holding in your hands, because this is just translation. And maybe later on we'll touch also my father's commentary on Tanya. It's on the right side of your folders, and so you'll find that paper commentary on Tanya. Okay, I hope everyone got this. So a perfect place to start in a book is usually its beginning, and this is the end of the first chapter of Tanya. One of the famous ideas of Tanya is that each person has two souls, not just one, two souls, the Nefesh HaBahamit, the animal soul, and the Nefesh HaElokit, the godly soul. It is interesting that the first soul that Tanya presents is not the godly soul. it's the animal soul. And there are different explanations for that, but I think the basic explanation for that is because the animal soul is is the soul we encounter first. This is the soul we are born with, this is the soul we're growing with, and we're all aware of our animal soul. Unlike our godly soul that sometimes we're not so aware of it, we're all aware of the animal soul. So here's a short description of what is the animal soul. Indeed, the explanation of the matter is based on what Rabbi Chaim Vital was the student of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, founder of the Lurianic Kabbalah, and the person who wrote all the Arizal's books. What Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote in Shar HaKedusha and Etz Chaim, that every Jew, righteous and wicked alike, has two souls. This is derived from what is written in the verse, "And souls," plural, "it was I who made," referring to the two souls. One soul originates from the side of the klipa, husk, and sitra achra, the other side. This is the soul that is enclosed in men's blood to imbue the body with life, as it is written, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." From it stem all the negative character traits. So, just reading that, we understand that the animal soul is, first of all, what gives life and energy to our body. But reading just that paragraph gives us the notion that this is the bad guy. The animal soul is where all the negative character traits are stemming from. And we're thinking, okay, so it's very clear. We have the animal soul for the bad attributes, for the bad character traits, and we have probably the godly soul for all the good things that we have in our life, and for everything that is good, for everything that we have a good motivation for, is coming from the godly soul. But this is not what the Tanya is saying, and we'll continue to the next paragraph. Even the positive character traits, naturally ingrained in every Jew, such as compassion and kindness, stem from it. For in the Jew, the soul of the klipa originates from the klipat noga, glowing husk, which also contains good, as it relates to the mystery of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The animal soul, and here that's just a very brief description, it's being described in length in other chapters of Tanya. The animal soul is everything that is natural, every motivation that comes from what I want, what makes me feel good. That's the animal soul. The animal soul is the motivation for everything that could be self-fulfillment, could be everything that I enjoy from. And this is not necessarily bad things. I assume, I do not know some of you, but I did meet many of you, and you're good people. And everything that is good about us is not necessarily coming from our godly soul. Not at all. Our animal soul, at least for specific people, could be a wonderful thing. Compassion, love, kindness. We can live our entire lives and do many great things that are all stemming and are motivated just from our animal soul. Because again, animal soul, and the comparison to an animal is because it's natural. It's natural. It's everything that we are born with, and sometimes things that we are learned and raised by. All of these could be parts of our animal soul. So we can imagine a person who conducts a life of good deeds and being kind, giving tzedakah, and doing just great things. And his entire life are motivated by the animal soul. He's being animalistic, but he's just a higher, better form of an animal. Well, that's another discussion, but we can say, okay, so some animals have, their good desires are, helping, raising their descendants, etc. And we, as human beings, we can have much higher goals and much higher standards for what we want from ourselves. A person could be a musician, a great writer, a person who helps other people, and that's all because this is part of his nature. Tanya here, what we just read, brings the two character traits, two attributes of compassion and kindness. Compassion and kindness are mentioned in the Gemara as 2 out of 3 things that all Jews are blessed with. Well, at least that's what the Talmud says. I don't know. That we all have compassion and we're all kind. So compassion and kindness, which are great attributes, are part of our animalistic nature. We're just nice animals. We're good. But that's just being animalistic, and that's the last time for today that I'm going to ask you to open a page in this book. Reading the rest of it I will allow you to do later on. And this is, again, my page 101. The chapter is The Good and Evil Inclinations. But this is, so in my version, this is the third to last page of this chapter. And so it's towards its end. The paragraph starts with the word "some scholars relate to." 110. Okay, so it's either 101 if you hold this version, or 110 if you're holding the other one. Some scholars relate to the ensemble of human inclinations as our animal soul. And of course, he's referring here to the Tanya. Meaning that the component of human beings that makes us part of the animal world, a creature among creatures. This definition is more accurate than the definition of inclinations as good or evil, since almost all human inclinations, as above, are morally neutral, neither intrinsically good nor bad. Their tendency toward good or evil depends to a great extent on the way they are managed and applied. This also explains why the general definition of inclinations, including those that we share with animals, doesn't include only desires that every animal is capable of fulfilling. Some human inclinations are typically human in the sense that they do not exist among animals, at least not on the same level. But even assuming that they are unique to human beings, even when these inclinations take on abstract and sublime forms, they are still part of the manifestation of man as a biological creature. The inclination that motivates human beings to acquire knowledge or create objects of beauty is essentially no different from the inclination that motivates birds to fly. Just as the bird wants to fly because it has wings, so do we want to use our brains because we have them. So this is a very good description of the animal soul. And therefore, the name of this chapter is Good and Evil Inclinations. We are used to see them in Jewish writings as the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, the good inclination and evil inclination. And many times when I teach Tanya, and some of the people who come to my classes, they learned some Tanya, they heard about this concept of animal soul and godly soul, and they're always telling me, okay, so these are just the names that the Tanya is referring to, the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, to the good inclinations and bad inclinations, right? The good inclination is the godly soul, and the bad inclinations is the animal soul. But no, that's not true. Because as we said, our animal soul is definitely capable of so many good things. It's about the motivation. If the motivation is my nature, being a human being, so that's animalistic in this sense. Again, the greatest philosophers, musicians, artists, their motivation was part of them being human beings. And as my father is saying, they have a brain, so they need to use it. But that's part of the animalistic soul. So what is the godly soul? What is it about? But just one more thing. We can even be observant and conduct a life of Jewish observance. And all of that is part of the animal soul. We can wake up in the morning and daven and go to shul and keep Shabbat and doing all these mitzvot. And this is all coming from our animal soul. For example, if one is raised in a religious home, and this is what he's brought up by, this is what he's used to. In Shabbat, for instance, you don't turn on the light, let's say. Okay, so for him, that's part of living the family's legacy. That's what we do. That's how we act on Shabbat. On the day of Shabbat, so we don't listen to music and we don't drive the car. Okay, let's say. But it has nothing to do with godliness or with the godly soul. It's part of the way I was brought up by. So you could be a very spiritual person, but yet again, this is not part of the motivation of the godly soul. So what is the godly soul? The godly soul shows up on the second chapter of Tanya. And we're going to read this. It's on the first page, the last paragraph here. The second soul in the Jew is an actual portion of God above. And as it is written with regard to the creation of men, the Lord God blew into his nostrils the soul of life. And in the morning prayers, which we're going to learn later on with my dear brother, and you blew it into me. This is understood in accordance with the teaching brought in the name of the Zohar that states, one who blows from within himself he blows. Meaning, from deep within his inner self, a person brings out the deep inner life force within him when he blows with force. The first sentence we read, this paragraph, I don't like reading in English. Because it is one of the famous lines in Tanya, in Hebrew. It says, "V'nefesh hashanit b'Yisrael hi chelek Eloka mimal mamash." So in this translation, which is a very good one, it says, is an actual portion of God above. So that's an okay translation. And I guess this is the right way to translate it into English. As I had the discussion earlier with Geya, that it's so difficult to translate from Hebrew to English, and it's fine. What they did here is okay. But actually, the words chelek Eloka mimal, a portion of God above, this is nothing new. This is written in the book of Job, book of Iyov. It says that about the soul, chelek Eloka mimal, a portion of God above. The word that the Tanya adds here is the word actual, the word mamash. My grandfather, my mother's father, who I'm named after, well, 2 of my 4 names are his names. I didn't know him, that's why I'm named after him. He passed away just a few months before I was born. And I heard from many people, but also from my father, that I really missed a very interesting person. When I read the sort of eulogy that my father wrote about my grandfather, I understood, and I also heard it from him specifically, that he really admired my grandfather. My grandfather was not a great scholar. He was a Lubavitch Hasid who was born in Russia and raised there, was teaching there. And later on, when they fled from Russia, they came to France through Poland. And he lived his whole life in France. And it's interesting because my grandfather had the passion to go to Eretz Israel. He really wanted to make Aliyah. That was his dream. My mother is saying that always he kept singing and telling stories about Eretz Israel, and that was the dream. We'll get away from Russia. France is just a stop, and then we're on our way to Israel. But as they got to France, at a certain point, they asked the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and he told my grandfather and his family to stay in France in order to keep and enforce and encourage Jewish life in Paris, in France, which is what he did with great pain on the one hand, because he had to really give away his dream, but he did that because that's what you're supposed to do. So anyways, I always keep hearing that he was a very, very special person. And in one of his letters to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he asked him about these words. What does it mean? What does the Tanya wants to say with the word actual, with the word mamash? What does he add with it? That it's true? That it's not just a metaphor? Is that what the Tanya is telling us? So the Rebbe wrote to him a very interesting explanation, and he says the following. The reason the Tanya says that the soul, the godly soul, is chelek Eloka mimal mamash, is in order to tell us, to teach us that the godly soul, as elevated and as godly and holy as it is a very actual entity. It's actual in the way that it touches actuality. That the soul is not just this abstract thing. It's something that has to be part of our actual life and can touch our actual life and change our actual life. when we start knowing about the neshama, which is definitely the first step, realization, awareness of the neshama. What is the neshama? What does it want? That is the first step to get to interact with our godly soul, and then learn that our godly soul is not just limited to the conference on the Soul Day or to shul or whatever we study our favorite Talmud, Kabbalah book. Our godly soul should be part of our daily life. It should be part of our daily life in the sense that when we eat, when we sleep, when we interact, we are supposed to be driven by our godly soul. So, in Tanya, it says that we have a godly soul, and this godly soul is a part of God. You know, I read Tanya, and I read this line in Tanya many years before I read Harry Potter. But when I did read Harry Potter, so I thought that, I guess that at least some of you are familiar, that this episode, when he gets his first letters at the age of 11, that he's a wizard and he's, you know, he can come to learn at Hogwarts, the joy and revelation, I am a wizard. I'm different. And now I understand that so many things that I knew, I noticed, now I know, now I can give it a name. I'm a wizard. And when I read that episode in Harry Potter, I thought about this paragraph in Tanya. Because when you read this paragraph, it tells you, it gives you this great revelation. You have a godly soul. You have a part of God that is part of you. This is amazing. We're not just human beings. We are something else. We're godly. We're not God, but we're godly. And we have a godly particle in ourselves that, again, the first stage is to understand that it's there. To understand that we have this godly part in ourselves and that we can live our life in accordance to what it guides us, what it wants from us. So, again, it's a revelation, and it's something that should, make you smile. And when you open your day and read this paragraph or think about this paragraph, you think, okay, I have a godly soul. An actual godly soul, as we said. It's not just a metaphor, it's not just a phrase from the Proverbs from the book of Job. It's something that is very actual. So what is the godly soul? What does it want? What does it mean? So our godly soul is, again, part of God, and as such, it is anything that God wants us to do. And our godly soul, its main desire, the reason it's here, the reason it descended to our body, is in order to help us and to call us, to remind us that we are part of God and that we want to live in this world lives that are connected to God. So when we're talking about the godly soul, we're talking about motivation. Okay? Just like the animal soul is the motivation, the drive that brings us to do so many things, good things, bad things, natural things. The godly soul is the motivation that for doing things for the sake of God, for the sake of being connected to God, for the sake of being part of God. And therefore, when we can do the same exact action, but it could be derived from the animal soul or from the godly soul. Actually, and I'm really sorry because I really wanted to read you this paragraph from the book, The Soul, but unfortunately I couldn't find it in the English version. I only saw it in the Hebrew version. So maybe it got lost on the way with the editing, maybe not. But one of the things that he's saying there is that one of life's missions is to understand whether our actions, our thoughts, are derived from the godly soul or from the animal soul. Because they could be really close. Sometimes they're the same exact thing. I can give to charity $100,000, and that could be derived by the animal soul because I'm a kind person, because I want to do good things in the world, because I want the publicity, because I want to be tapped on my, and saying, okay, you're such a great person. Or the motivation could be, I am giving this money to charity because God said so, and only because of that. So it's the same exact action, but it's just very different motivation. And what my father describes, again, in the Hebrew version of the book, learn Hebrew, read the Hebrew version. I like it better. But what he says there is that Tanya, which is a book of Chassidut, and Chassidut is always trying to look inside, to look deeper. And this is very typical for Tanya and Chassidut in general, telling us that it's not the outside. One of the main ideas of Tanya is the definitions, the three definitions of a tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha. A righteous man, an evil man, and a Beinoni, which I don't know how you translate. Please help. In between, okay, that's why I don't know the right phrase. Probably there is an exact one. So it says in the Gemara that there are three definitions, and the question whether you're a tzaddik or a Rasha or a Beinoni. So when we learn just the Talmud, so we are usually thinking that a righteous person is the person that at least 51% of his actions are good. And the evil person is the one that at least 51% of his actions are bad. And the Beinoni, in between, he's a person that is 50-50. But I'll make a very long story short because much of the first part of Tanya is dedicated to this. At the bottom line, the Tanya is saying that a tzaddik, a rasha, and a Beinoni could all look and act the same. They all go to shul first thing in the morning. They all daven with kavanah. They all do the same exact thing, and they all wear white beards. And maybe even black hats. But one of them is a righteous person, and one of them is an evil person. Because the definitions are much deeper and much more complicated than just, okay, he's doing that or not doing that. It's not the actions, it's the motivation. It's why you do it, and how you do it, what makes you do this. So this is very, very typical of Chassidut. Taking a deeper look of why are we doing what we're doing. And when we're talking about animal soul and godly soul, so this is very important, because the actions could really be the same thing. A person could be, spending 2 hours of his Shabbat morning in the shul, in the synagogue, and praying with passion and singing. And the question is, at the end of that day, at the end of these 2 hours, where was this prayer stemming from? From my godly soul or from my animal soul. In simple words, we could say that anything that comes from the animal soul is anything that is there to please me, to make me feel good. And if I'm doing whatever I'm observing, because it makes me feel good, so according to Tanya, I'm not in the right place. If you're doing it just for the sake of yourself, to feel better about yourself, not because there's a higher goal, a higher motivation, not because this is what God wants you to do, so it's very nice. And when we're speaking about Gan Eden and Gehinom, paradise and heaven and hell, so probably a person that will do the right things will go to the right place, will take the right path to heaven. But that's not what you're supposed to do. That's not our mission. That's not our goal. Our goal is to be very exact. Our goal is to know and to do things because it's a part of the mission, because it's part of what God wants us to do. At this point, we will take a short break. And after this break, you're invited to serve yourselves. We'll have a short section for questions and answers, and we'll continue with some more learning in the Tanya.
Are you taking questions from the floor, or do you want us to write it out?
No, I'll just take it.